Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Lunar Park by Bret Easton Ellis. Now, Lunar Park was published in 2005, and in all honesty, I would actually consider this to be sort of a spiritual sequel to both Less Than Zero, which was Ellis's first novel, and American Psycho, which is arguably his most famous novel. Because, in so many ways, Lunar Park is about how both of those books have affected and changed Bret Easton Ellis' life, for better or worse. Also, Patrick Bateman from American Psycho does show up in this novel. Well, kinda. Basically, what Lunar Park is it's a mock-memoir. It begins as if it's the autobiography of Bret Easton Ellis. However, the story itself is clearly fictional, and the Bret Easton Ellis who shows up in the novel is a highly fictionalized version of the real-life Bret Easton Ellis. For example, Bret Easton Ellis is actually gay in real life, and while the book does touch on his homosexuality a little bit, in the novel he has a wife, a son, and a stepdaughter, and all three of these are completely fictional characters. As far as I know, in real life, Bret Easton Ellis has never had a wife and kids. So, the book is a really interesting blend between fact and fiction. It's a metafiction piece about Bret Easton Ellis' real life and his fictional world merging together. And the book is also very much a commentary on the writing process, as well as being a subtle satire on celebrity culture and on Bret Easton Ellis' own public image. But the book is all of that in the guise of a Stephen King-style ghost story. Bret Easton Ellis has said that he was a huge Stephen King fan growing up, and Lunar Park is ultimately his tribute to King. And you could definitely see a Stephen King influence on this novel. There's elements of The Shining, The Monkey, even Dark Tower, but what Lunar Park actually reminded me the most of was Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which was the 7th film in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, but it's stood apart from the rest of the series, where it was actually about the people who made the Nightmare on Elm Street movies being haunted by a demon from hell taking on the form of Freddy Krueger. Now, I don't know if that movie was an influence on this book or not, but Lunar Park has a very similar premise to that of Wes Craven's New Nightmare, only using Bret Easton Ellis' characters, namely Patrick Bateman. Now, Lunar Park is my second favorite Bret Easton Ellis novel, next to Less Than Zero, and what I think is interesting about this is, stylistically and tonally, this is so radically different from anything that Bret Easton Ellis has done up until this point, yet thematically, I actually think this does very much fit in with Ellis's overall body of work. Now, the plot of Lunar Park is it follows Bret Easton Ellis himself as the main character, whose first novel, Less Than Zero, made him a celebrity when he was only in his early 20s, but it was his third novel, American Psycho, which made him simultaneously a phenomenon and a pariah. And his drug addiction and party boy lifestyle made him a very controversial figure in the media. But in the book, you find out that at a certain point he had a relationship with an actress named Jance Dennis, and they actually had a kid together, even though he tries to deny in the beginning that this is even his kid. This woman ends up having another child with somebody else. But basically, at a certain point, Ellis tries reconnecting with this woman and reconnecting with his son, and basically this woman offers him a shot at redemption, so him and this woman end up getting married. But as much as in the beginning Ellis claims that he's a changed man, you realize that he's still doing drugs, and he's even sleeping with this girl at the college he's currently teaching at. So in the beginning of the novel, he's kind of a sleazebag who's only outwardly claiming that he's been redeemed. But in the novel, weird things begin happening to Bret Easton Ellis, where he meets this young man named Clayton, who bears a frightening resemblance to himself when he was a young man, and Clayton also bears a lot of similarities to the character of Clay from Less Than Zero, as well as a lot of similarities to that of Patrick Bateman. Meanwhile, Ellis is also experiencing paranormal activity at his house. It appears that he's being haunted by an evil, possibly demonic presence that is primarily possessing his stepdaughter's doll, the Turby. But there's also a series of murders happening, and it appears that Ellis's most infamous creation, Patrick Bateman, has literally come off the page and is committing these murders. Basically, this ghost or demon or whatever it is causing the real world and Ellis's fictional world to overlap in a really horrifying way. And again, Lunar Park is a really interesting mix between a metafiction piece, a domestic drama about fatherhood, and a horror novel. And it goes from being quite funny to scary to deeply moving and even heartbreaking. Now, as a horror novel, Bret Easton Ellis definitely plays around with different horror tropes in this, where it goes from being psychological horror, like all the stuff dealing with the Clayton character really does feel like something out of a stalker thriller, even though Clayton is clearly a bit more than just a stalker, like he's clearly some kind of manifestation of this demon, but there's some really creepy shit dealing with the Clayton character, but you go from psychological horror to more visceral, balls-to-the-wall kind of horror, where you actually have a killer doll in this story, the Turby, which is a pretty overt parody of Furbies, and I have jokingly called Lunar Park a book about a killer Furby doll, which is oversimplifying it, but in a way is also kind of dead-on accurate. But you also have this furry thing that's coming into his hallway, and this is actually a monster that Ellis made up when he was a little kid, and the whole idea is that this demon is manifesting itself into things from Ellis's past. But in this aspect of the story, it almost feels like you're reading a B-horror movie. Now, in the book, Ellis's fictional family has this dog named Victor, and what happens with this dog towards the end of the book is so almost ridiculously nightmarish. So, the book does not skimp out on the horror. Now, there are a lot of themes of fatherhood in this novel, and so much of the book is really about Bret Easton Ellis sort of finding closure with the relationship with his actual father, who died in 1992, who according to him was very abusive towards Ellis, his sisters, and his mother. And he has often claimed that he loosely based Patrick Bateman off of his father. However, in recent years, he kind of backed away from that and actually admitted that he only used his father as an excuse for Patrick Bateman, that in reality, Patrick Bateman was really more so based on himself. And you can tell that so much of this book is about Bret Easton Ellis dealing with the trauma of what his father did, while at the same time also kind of forgiving his father and realizing that his father was just a deeply flawed man, and in some ways he's not that different from his father. Especially because in the story it's implied that the spirit of Ellis's father is reaching out to either warn him or possibly protect him from this demon. And the novel's themes of fatherhood are also reflected with Ellis's fictional son in the story, whose name is Robert, which is also the name of Bret Easton Ellis's father. And his son in the story is so cold and so distrusting of him, but you realize that it's Bret Easton Ellis's own fault because he wasn't there for this kid during the first few years of his life. Like, he didn't even want to take responsibility for this kid in the beginning, and so much of the book is about Bret Easton Ellis sort of paying for this sin. And it also shows the book's blend between fact and fiction, because a lot of the stuff dealing with Bret Easton Ellis' father in the book is actually true from what I understand, yet his son and the rest of his family are completely fictional. Now, his son Robert is also an interesting character because in the novel there's sort of this subplot about a series of disappearances happening involving young boys, and it's never made quite clear whether there's a connection between these disappearances and this demon that is haunting Bret Easton Ellis. But you find out in the novel that his son and his friends actually know something about these boys who disappeared. And I like how the book never actually explains what this is. It's left very ambiguous. But I do want to point out that the final scene between Ellis and his son at the end of this book is heartbreaking and is one of the most powerful things in this story. Now, the book is populated by both fictional characters and real people. For example, Bret Easton Ellis' real-life friend, Jay McInerney, who is an author himself, is actually a minor character in this. Another thing that's interesting is you actually have characters from some of Bret Easton Ellis' other books showing up in this. Not just Patrick Bateman, but in the book, Ellis has a next-door neighbor named Mitchell Allen, who is actually a character from Ellis's second novel, The Rules of Attraction, which was actually the first book that Patrick Bateman showed up in. And there's also a reference to the character of Paul Denton, who is another character from The Rules of Attraction, but I think it's interesting how Ellis references Mitchell and Paul as if they're real people in this novel's universe, yet Rules of Attraction is supposedly just a fictional novel in this novel's universe, but again, it adds to the metafiction nature of the story. You also have Donald Kimball, the detective from American Psycho, showing up in this, although there is sort of a twist with this character that I don't want to give away. But yeah, Lunar Park is a really interesting novel. It's a unique mix between fact, fiction, fantasy, and horror, and it's a unique addition to Bret Easton Ellis' body of work. So yeah, that was my review on Lunar Park by Bret Easton Ellis, and bye.